Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening from Sri Lanka and good day to everyone joining us around the world. The webinar or the discussion that we are going to have today is organized by Aggregate Global. About Aggregate Global, I'm sure we'll be start hearing in a while because the coordinators are having a problem in joining with us today. And basically what we are trying to do is to discuss about the current, rather than discussing about the current scenario that Sri Lanka is facing, and try to understand, discuss and see what sort of things are in store for us and what recommendations can be put forward to the government to revive the agriculture sector in this country. So that's the basic idea. And with me, I'm Buddhi Marambe from University of Peradeniya in Sri Lanka. And with me, I have Professor Channa Prakash. And of course, Professor Chandra will give a self-introduction in a while when he starts going ahead with about the topic that we are discussing today. To start on with, until the official introductions are made later when the organizer or the host, Mr. Tarak Jayasinghe joins, we all know that Sri Lanka is going through a very difficult scenario right now economically. And of course, you cannot bring in only one factor to say that this is the contributory factor for the economic crisis Sri Lanka is facing right now. But in terms of agriculture, there was a particular scenario. We are about a year ago, Sri Lankan government took a decision to go complete organic, where the agriculture sector in the country was evolving for more than 7 decades, thanks to the contributions made by the researchers at the Department of Agriculture, the commodity research institutes, the universities, the technology institutes that we have in Sri Lanka, and more importantly, the farming community and the private sector. So it's a coherent collective work that made sure agriculture prospers at a rapid pace in the recent past. For example, if you go back in the timeline about 8 decades ago in 1940s, if you take paddy, which is our major staple food crop, we were harvesting only about 650 kilograms per hectare using the traditional technologies and traditional varieties that we had. But thanks to the foresights that the scientists had, even during early 1950s, Sri Lanka able to move at a rapid pace in terms of varietal development, coming up with technological packages, making sure integrated plant nutrient systems work in the field, as well as making recommendations accordingly, and to make sure in paddy, for example, I'm just taking it as an example, the mere 650 kilogram per hectare average paddy yield was increased up to about 4,500 kilograms per hectare by 2020. So that's a level of progress that we have had. So despite all that, due to certain reasons, of course, we can argue on that, but still the government of Sri Lanka took a decision to go complete organic, and starting the decision was taken on 27th April 2021, and it was gazetted on 6th May 2021, where the importation of synthetic fertilizers and synthetic pesticides were completely banned. But I must tell you, we have 2 cultivating seasons, as we all know, especially for the seasonal crops. One is called the shorter rainy season, or the minor cultivating season, which we are in right now. Even this year, it starts from March and end up in September, and the major cultivating season starts from October and end up in February in the following year. And by the time this decision was taken, we have already started last year, we have already started cultivating in the Yala cultivating season, which is the minor season. And part of the fertilizers and synthetic pesticides that we require to support the agricultural sector of the country has already been imported or reached in Sri Lanka by that time. So basically the decision taken was actually an issue for the main cultivation season, which started in September, where we have got the harvest in the case of paddy and most of other cereals and other field crops. And we have now seen the real impact, which was actually even going beyond than what scientists predicted. From the very beginning, from the time the government took this decision, and the scientists were coming forward, explaining the scenario, requesting, pleading the government of Sri Lanka to revert this decision. But of course, government did revert, but then it took about 7 months. And on the 30th November 2021, government decided to remove the gazette notifications that have been issued, but it was too late, as we all know, for the main cultivating seasons to go ahead, because even if we start placing orders today to import fertilizers and synthetic pesticide, it will take about another 2 to 2.5 months to get the products done, going through the procedures that we have. And we have already experienced, we have already had a bad experience, and now is to learn lessons and to look forward to meet. I mean, we have already gone through half of one season this year. We are into the month of May. The cultivating season formally started somewhere in mid-March. So quite a significant number of months or time has already been spent. And we now see the farming community who also went ahead and protested heavily against the government decision, together with many scientists, academia as well. Even now, there seems to be a lot of reluctance in many parts of the country for the farming community to go in and start entering the fields to start cultivation. It's not to say that it's happening everywhere in Sri Lanka in the same manner. Wherever the fertilizer is available, having spin-offs or spill-offs from the previous seasons, even with small, minute quantities, actually it's very rare scenario. We have seen people cultivating, and also the government has pledged to the farming community, especially the paddy farmers, to provide organic fertilizer at different levels: solid organic fertilizer, liquid organic fertilizer, compost, and also biofertilizers as packages for cultivation of paddy mainly, so that it will reach farmers free of charge. And that's a pledge that has been given. But we have seen in the television, news networks, media networks, and so on, still the farmers seems not happy because of the quality of the material that they have received through a free subsidy given, free products that have been distributed. But with all that is happening, academia, many scientists once again got together and started putting up a package of activities that we have to go ahead. So that is what we are going to discuss today. And before I started talking about what we are putting forward, we have a very experienced campaigner, Professor Channa Prakash. Professor Channa Prakash, would you like to intervene? You see, with your knowledge, your technical expertise, and with your work experience in many other countries, you do understand where Sri Lanka is in right now, a desperate situation. Reviving agriculture is extremely important. We know that, we have understood it very well. To tell you, even His Excellency, the President, who put forward the cabinet paper on his own and got the cabinet approval to impose this decision, finally, about a month ago, finally came in public and declared that he has made a big mistake by taking this decision. For example, he was categorically stating that not giving fertilizer, he was referring to synthetic fertilizer, to the farming community is a mistake. So there was a promise, kind of pledge, that he will be making sure the fertilizer will be available for this season, but it's too late even right now. But still, just yesterday evening, we came to know that India, through the Indian credit line that has been granted to Sri Lanka to overcome this issue, is now ready to dispatch 65,000 metric tons of urea fertilizer to Sri Lanka. I know there are restrictions in India to export urea. There are a lot of policy issues. India is a major producer of urea, we know, in the global market, but not an exporter. But what I learned, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Chandra, is a net importer as well. I may be wrong in that case, the statement that I made. But for you, if you think, what kind of support should come from other countries to Sri Lanka at this level? Or in other words, what kind of policy directives or policy changes that, in your experience, that you think we should follow for future in reviving our agriculture sector? Mind you, quite a significant number of farmers are there in Sri Lanka. Majority are considered by UN standards are poor, but of course there are wealthy farmers as well. There are farmers with purchasing power, but of course the majority are cultivating very low extents of land. About 70% of the paddy farmers are having less than one hectare of land, for example, in a country like ours. So let me invite Professor Channa to give his comments, and I will also chip in a while. Over to you.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Dr. Marambe. I thank the Aggregate Global for providing us with this platform to talk about a very, very important issue. And thank you, Mr. Taraka Jayasinghe is here. Sri Lanka today is literally on fire. I see so much going on in your country, and that is very sad for me to see and hear what is going on, because I grew up not very far from Sri Lanka in Bangalore, India. And I grew up listening to the beautiful music from Radio Ceylon. And Sri Lanka was always a country that was very charming. It's a part of our mythology in India. And when I visited Sri Lanka, I was really flabbergasted as to how beautiful your country is. It's like a tropical Switzerland in many ways. And it is also a country that is blessed with a tremendous natural resource, very dynamic people, and it was on the path to being a middle income country, a high income country along the lines of Singapore or even Malaysia. And even today, I think it will get there if Sri Lanka takes care of some of its problem, because you don't, you have 22 million people, which is not very large by compared to your some of the population density that you have in the neighboring countries. And you have a very beautiful country that with a lot of potential for tourism, which was the major source of foreign exchange, and also the agriculture. Agriculture in Sri Lanka is one of the most important sector, which employs almost 1/3 of the population. And so, considering all this, when you look back, I'm wondering why did the government of Sri Lanka and why did your president suddenly make this very reckless decision in April of 2021 to go 100% organic? I do understand the reasons why some people want to move in that direction, because Sri Lanka, like in most developing countries, there has been a misuse of the fertilizer. There is a misuse of pesticides. And this is something that we have seen in the last 40, 50 years happening in many countries. And also Sri Lanka subsidized fertilizers a lot. And because of that, it led to rampant misuse. Like when you get something free or at very low cost, then people don't have responsible use of that. But nevertheless, I believe Sri Lanka was influenced by other people in other countries, environmental activists, the green activists, who have been indulging in a lot of misinformation campaign against conventional agriculture and asking the politicians in many countries to stop the use of many of these inputs that are so critical in sustaining your population, in sustaining your agriculture. And by cutting that off in an abrupt manner, I think Sri Lanka paid a very huge price. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the current economic crisis that you're having in Sri Lanka is only because of this. It was because of a multiplicity of factors, starting with the sad situation of pandemic that cut off the vital tourism dollars that Sri Lanka gets, along with many other issues, but many of them relate to the political mismanagement. But this was like adding fuel to the fire, trying to cut the vital inputs necessary to sustain your agriculture was, I think, is a catalyst that accelerated the economic disaster that was already in the making. And because of that, we saw the rice yields coming down by 20%. The tea is the biggest exporter for Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka gets something like $1.5 billion from tea. And by cutting off the nutrient need supply to the tea industry by banning fertilizer was, I think, a big disaster in the making. But anyway, moving forward is what we are here for. And one big thing that I can see is this is a lesson. Sri Lanka is a lesson that every other country now looking to embrace such sudden and transition to organic should be now very careful. Organic farming has many good ideas in terms of trying to lower the footprint, the ecological footprint on farming, trying to reduce some of the abuse of use of inputs in farming, and many of those ideas are quite good. But what is today happening is really the organic is an industry that indulges in deceptive marketing. It promises much of the urban folks who have really no understanding of what agriculture is. It promises this is a safer food, it's a nutritious food, and it is something that is very healthy for the environment. In actual reality, there is very little evidence for any of that. So one of the biggest problem with organic farming is its low yield. And again and again, studies show that when you practice organic farming, you get only 30 to 50%. I mean, you incur yield losses anywhere from 30 to 50%. And that is a very important factor that one needs to keep in mind, because it affects the food security of the people who are in countries such as Sri Lanka, where it is very vital, which already spends about $2 to $3 billion on importing foods. And now Sri Lanka's foreign reserves is less than $50 million. And so even 1% raise in food price leads to 10 million people going hungry around the world. So when organic increases food price by 50%, where are those people in Sri Lanka or elsewhere going to get that money from? Sri Lanka's annual income, annual average income is about $4,000. And so you have less yield, impacts food security, and people who are directly involved in farming incur low income, the farm income is reduced, and then the nutrition. People, because of increased price of organic fruits and vegetables, people tend to use, there is a direct scientific evidence showing that when there's an increased price of fruits and vegetables, people tend to use less of those, and that is directly affecting the health and well-being of the people. And so moving forward, I believe that Sri Lanka should get away from this ideology-based approach to farming. Like any country who needs to improve its agricultural productivity should be open to scientific innovation, because that is the only meaningful way forward for us, considering agriculture is facing so much problems around the world today. We are already seeing now, since February 24th, how the war on Ukraine by Russia has already impacted food prices around the world. And it shows how fragile our food system around the world is. Almost all the wheat that is eaten in places like Egypt and Yemen and Nigeria comes from Ukraine and Russia. India imports 100% of its sunflower oil from Ukraine, and all of that is now gone. And not only that, these places are also source of fertilizers, so especially phosphate and potash fertilizers coming from Ukraine and Russia. And this is already impacting the global food prices, global food production. And we should not be adding more to that through these politically imprudent decisions. And so moving forward again, I believe Sri Lanka should explore how it can reduce the use of agri-chemicals on the farm through sensible improvements in integrated pest management, so that you could cut down on the use of synthetic pesticides, if that is what is causing many of the problems, and integrated nutrient management. You see, fertilizers, Sri Lanka primarily uses first generation of fertilizers. Those fertilizers are very inefficient. Only 20% of those fertilizers are taken up by the plants, and the other 80% just get washed away. And that is what causing to all your environmental pollution and some of the problems that you're seeing. But if you are able to remove the fertilizer subsidy and divert it towards second and third generation fertilizers. These are fertilizers that are slow releasing, and they are and also combining it precision agriculture, where you apply fertilizer based on the actual need, based on the knowledge of what the soil nutrient levels are. We are already practicing that in India in a major way. Like Tata Chemicals provides you with a fertilizer designed for the farm based on the nutrient levels of the farm that they would have identified. And then we also need to regulate many of this. See, you can go buy pesticides openly in many of our countries, whereas in United States and Europe, pesticides are very highly regulated. It is kind of like almost like a prescription drug. You cannot just go and buy what you want. So the application of pesticide is dependent on the need, and it is tailored to the specific pest or disease, and it's also highly regulated in a way that the farmers, the growers are trained in the use and the application of such pesticides, so that we minimize any damage and hitting the non-target organisms, or even using the wrong pesticide. And I see places when I visit India, there's rampant adulteration of pesticides, rampant misuse of pesticides. I think some of these are what has gotten a bad rap in agriculture in India. But the answer is not banning it. Just because there are few accidents in the use of cars, you don't go ahead and ban the cars, right? So it is the same way with any technology, and fertilizers and pesticides are not any different. But again, in the long run, we have tremendous new innovations coming along. My area of expertise happens to be in biotechnology, and I have a front row seat in watching every day the development that are coming along. We already have plants in the pipeline that have very high efficiency in the uptake of nitrogen, for instance. We will have probably in the medium future, even cereals that are able to fix nitrogen, just like legumes, and better efficiency in the uptake of phosphorus and potassium, and more disease resistance, crops that are tailored to withstand drought, crops that are tailored to withstand heat, the kind of big heat, massive heat that we are seeing around India. And so by being open to science, by open to innovation, Sri Lanka could, and I have seen some very good biotechnology labs in your country. You have some of the best scientists in the world, world-class scientists in biotechnology. And if you foster that, not just biotechnology, but all other technology, there is exciting applications of sensors, robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of them, even with application to smallholder farmers. So Sri Lanka move in that direction, not in the ideological voodoo type of farming that is cult-based. This is organic because it limits what your farmers would be able to use, and it's not based on any science or technology. And and many of that is even very toxic, because a lot of people don't realize people use pesticides and fungicides in organic farming, and some of them are based on 18th and 19th century technology, but also learn from some of the elements of the agroecology or the organic farming, as to how we can bring in some elements that are validated by science, and in a way that you combine the best of your traditional knowledge, the best of some of the agroecological based approaches to farming, and combine it with what is happening in many other areas, whether it is genomics or other areas, improving in science. And I think combine that with meaningful policies, agricultural policies, is the way forward for Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much. And you gave a lot of very important food for thought, actually, for us to see how we have to design our agriculture for future. But just to do some justice and just to give some clarifications, Professor Channa, in Sri Lanka, the fertilizer imports, actually, synthetic fertilizer imports, at least since 2005, when a new subsidy program was introduced, have been very highly regulated. For example, at the beginning of the year, the government
Okay.
of Sri Lanka will decide, depending on the anticipated cultivated extent for the seasonal crop, and we know the extent of perennial crops, the quantity of fertilizer that has been imported is regulated and fixed. So, for example, we know the extent of paddy that is being cultivated. So, the fertilizer requirement has been estimated by the Department of Agriculture, and only that volume or quantity will be imported to Sri Lanka. So that was regulated heavily. But the issue was, as you quite correctly said, is the subsidy. Of course, it was about 90% subsidy until very recently, but from 2020, it was totally free of charge, especially for paddy farmers. Actually, those things led to misuses. So the total quantum or volume that is being imported is constant because it's regulated. But once you have it free of charge, farmers tend to use it for unintended crops, isn't it? We are being
Right.
given fertilizer for paddy, but it's free of charge. So naturally, the tendency is there. So there's a overuse for certain crops and certain locations, and underuse for other. Overall, it's a total constant when you look at the land mass of the country. And then also you came up with a very important point. I think we Sri Lankans have been talking about it quite a lot, but we did not get the government green light as well as the farmers' acceptance of these second, third generation fertilizers. When you have something given free of charge, Praschanna, so who is going to now go and purchase fertilizer, no matter how good they mean their efficiency and so on? So those are very important points, and I think the government should look into this. This an important scenario that while reviving agriculture sector in Sri Lanka, of course, in a crisis situation like this, the producer, the primary producer, will have to be supported. Consumer also have to be supported. In other words, there should be supported crucial nodal points in a food system, isn't it? That then and only then you can achieve the efficiency. But the way it has been overturned by overnight or destroyed overnight,
Exactly.
there's a television program also saying that destroyed in 10 seconds. You cannot revive it in 10 seconds. That's a problem. When an ecosystem goes for a 6, we have to think very, very carefully, plan well, bring in technological innovations, as you quite correctly said, to make sure there's a gradual recovery and we come back to normalcy. But of course, we have other problems hitting our economy. So we have to consider everything will work as a package. You simply cannot uplift the overall country's economy by looking at one sector only. Of course, agriculture is a very important pillar, as we all know. One important infrastructure that Sri Lankans we have been proposing since 2016, when the Department of Agriculture officially decided to go ahead with good agricultural practices certification program in Sri Lanka. That was meant for actually reducing, it's actually reducing misuse of pesticides and as well as
Right.
fertilizer. I must also tell you, pesticides are also well regulated in Sri Lanka, but because there's a licensing program, you have to have the import license always to bring a fertilizer or pesticides. But fertilizer, the quantities are determined at the beginning, but for pesticides, still the quantities are determined, but you cannot predict the pest incidences for a given year, for example. So there are always deviations that take place. So the important point that came up with GAP, Good Agricultural Practices Certification, we have global GAP, as we all know. There's Sri Lanka GAP certification program. And mind you, Professor Chandra, in 2016, only 7 farmers got registered for this program. Only 7 out of all. And now we see more than at least about nearly 3,000 people. I'm not sure it's more than that have got registered. So this is something that we can promote, that that's a judicious way of using inputs, as you quite correctly said, making sure input efficiency is there, and thereby to get the agriculture moving while ensuring the producer get better returns to investment and consumer get a quality product at the end, because you are not having input misuse in the environment. So this is something that we have been promoting even in the recent past, soon after the decision was taken by the government of Sri Lanka to go totally organic, saying that this is not going to work. I mean, all the Professor Chandan, ladies and gentlemen, in Sri Lanka, we all know the Department of Census and Statistics is the mandated agency to release all the statistics, including agriculture-related ones. Though they have not released the statistics right now, from the main cultivating season alone, the internal documentation says that there is about 50% reduction. So that's something that we have to keep in mind, as Professor Chan also quite correctly said, from experiences in other countries. So to revive this agriculture in a gradual process, we think one of the best ways is to look at the good agricultural practices certification program, and the policies, Professor Chan, has to focus on that if at all we are going to go ahead. At a cabinet level, a decision has been taken to convert into organic, but the same cabinet will now have to decide, for example, saying that, okay, the president himself have accepted that there's a problem, a mistake, but definitely we'll have to move along to say that, okay, the government principal working mechanism in agriculture is going to be good agricultural practices, for example, because the certification program is free in Sri Lanka, unlike the costly third-party certification comes in organic agriculture. Of course, we know this is another extreme. What are your thoughts, Professor Chan? You actually came up with very interesting ideas on this, on the new technological tools. I think that has to come in heavily in Sri Lanka, but of course at an affordable price. That's where something the government has to look into. Though I also do not think fertilizer and several inputs should be totally subsidized. It's not going to work, because only thing the end result will be, it will eat into country's economy, and also the farmers will start misusing it, because something is given free have no value for any human being. That happened naturally. So
Yeah,
in your opinion,
yeah.
when you look at GAP and when you look at biotechnological approaches, you gave some examples, but what best would suit Sri Lankan scenario for future?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Again, in biotechnology, Sri Lanka, the largest food crop that Sri Lanka grows is rice. And then the next crop that Sri Lanka grows is maize. And in both of these areas, we have, by use of plant tissue culture, plant genomics, transgenics, and now more lately gene editing, a tremendous improvement have been made. In the laboratories, there are already some applications of that, field trials, and even commercial release of some of these crops. And so, depending on what is the need for Sri Lanka, like you see, for instance, rice varieties that are resistant to bacterial blight can be developed in a way that you don't have to apply some of the chemicals to control that. The same way with control of with the resistance to insects developed, then you don't have to apply much pesticide. And again, there's also Sri Lanka is a partner with International Rice Research Institute in some of their research, and there is some really fascinating research that is coming along in trying to make rice more productive by making it a C4 type of photosynthesis to increase the productivity, just like as in corn and in sugarcane. And so, I could go on all day talking about some of the exciting things that are happening in the area of biotechnology, and we are already seeing improvements in that. Philippines has just released golden rice, and it is already now making its way into the shops, and that would help bring down the vitamin A deficiency in that country. Bangladesh is already growing, hundreds of thousands of Bangladesh farmers are growing BT brinjal, an eggplant or BT that has been engineered for pest resistance. And so these are just some examples in biotechnology, but it's not limited to biotechnology alone. Even other areas where technological progress is happening. In India now, I have seen farmers are using drones to apply pesticides in a very specific manner, with controlling the spray in that there is very little wastage involved, or they're hitting into the non-target areas. And these are some of the examples I'm talking about, just technology. But technology alone is not going to solve all the problems of Sri Lanka. As you said, it is how we, in the meaningful use of technology, and then the science policies or the agriculture policies that help facilitate the application of this. And Sri Lanka is not alone. There are so many other countries in that middle income and low income countries are facing a multitude of problems in agriculture. And I believe that when the policymakers rely on experts like yourself, agricultural economists, agricultural scientists, and to make meaningful decisions, and that is the best way forward, rather than just taking a very erratic decision based on opinion from few individuals with vested interests, not even from Sri Lanka, and making the decision was something very detrimental to your country. Because again, coming back to the issue of organic farm, you see there's only 1.5% of global land under agriculture is devoted to organic farming today. And some other countries which have a higher rate are you usually see in places like Sweden or Norway or Luxembourg, places where there is not a great deal of population pressure, places where have a lot of land, and places even if they don't grow any food, they still have the income to import all the food that they need. In other words, countries like that, again, they are not tropical countries with a huge pest load, and they do not have to use as much pesticides to control insects like we do in India or Sri Lanka, can afford to indulge in organic farming in a manner like 5% or 10%. And going 100% again in Sri Lanka was really a reckless decision, and it's something that would be instructive to all others. I noticed there are some questions coming up in the chat. So
let me read some of those things, Prashchana.
We'll go ahead.
Yeah, and Mr. Ben Hunt has informed that he's going to be in Sri Lanka in November 2022 this year, and he was talking about some interesting stuff. It's not a question, but for everyone to know that he's studying, he's a NAFIL scholar from UK and studying how to accelerate the adoption of carbon farming through the use of soil carbon markers and other business models. So he'll be here, and I see that the organizers have already responded saying that they would like to have another webinar with him when he land in Sri Lanka. So thank you very much, Ben, for that. And there are a few questions, and I think there's a question from Saura Panigrahi, and I think Professor Channa, you answered this question, but let me read.
Yeah, I can take that again. Saura, thank you for.
Is it even possible to go organic in today's time? If yes, what should be your rational approach? Over to you, Prashchana.
Yes, I think so, because there is this should be based on consumer demand and the societies. There's even in the United States, a very rich country. There is, if you ask people, do you want to buy pesticide-free food? Everybody would say yes. But on the other hand, they have a choice of buying not pesticide-free food, but if they could go to the organic food stores like Whole Foods here and buy that food. But when they recognize that tomatoes cost about 50% more if it's labeled organic, most of them would gravitate towards non-organic. And so there is a marketplace need and room for organic foods, and that it should coexist. And not going 100% is something that's not going to happen anywhere and should not, because organic is really a marketing, it's a marketing product. It is nothing really to do with sustainability or being healthy or nutritious. It's just like it's another brand. And the organic promoters have really vilified conventional agriculture to promote their products, and that is wrong, because people unknowingly should not be paying more for a product for which they are not getting any benefit, and many of the benefits are simply made up. but we could still go, organic the way if you want to, but a small percentage of your farming should remain that to cater mainly to the elites. I'm interested in knowing.
Prashana, can I add to what
Go
you
ahead,
said,
yeah.
especially on Sri Lankan scenario? Well, if you look at the most recent data on organic agriculture in Sri Lanka, by the way, organic farming is not new to Sri Lanka, not new to India, not new to the world, and this is a parallel line with respect to agricultural production which has been taking place. There are people who have been doing organic farming quite well, earning quite a lot of foreign exchange, because as Professor Chandra said, it's a demand-driven exercise, and there are niche markets, niche export markets where people have been exploring quite well. If you take the Sri Lankan scenario, only 2.6% of the total agricultural land, running up to about 72,000 hectares, are into organic agriculture based on the most recent IFORM statistics. But most interesting part to remember is that the most recent statistics up to about 2019 and the past 3 years before 2019, if you look at the reduction in organic farming land, it's about 26%. There is about 26% reduction in organic agricultural land, even in Sri Lanka, based on IFORM statistics that have been made available. So just to add to what Professor Chandra said, of course, there is a target market, niche markets. So when you go ahead and become more oriented towards that, of course, it's a very good business as well. But here we are talking about a country's food security. That's an important thing. And overall national food security, that is something that we have to keep in mind. But there's a question from Mr. Ramakumar. He says, and he's interested in knowing official data on the area, production and productivity of major crops that have been released for the Maha season 2021-2022. How do these final figures compare with data for Maha 2020-2021? That is, he's trying to compare, trying to see how things compared over 2 years, most recent 2 years. The internal documentation, Ramkumar, I must tell you, I will send you the crop forecasting data that is being made available every month, 15th of every month, by the Department of Agriculture. While Professor Chandra was discussing, I was trying to log into the DOA website, but because of the power issues, it was difficult. But I will send you, please send me your email address. I will definitely have the crop forecasting, which was released on 15th April. The next crop forecast report will come on 15th May, but all those data are available. But mind you, the final data with respect to the yield, in order to go into Department of Agriculture website, as I told you, has to be released by the Department of Census and Statistics. It will take a little bit of time, but all internal documentations very clearly indicate that there's about 50% reduction in yield, paddy yield, in 2021-2022 Maha season compared to the previous year's Maha season, thanks to the main contributory factor is being the ban imposed on synthetic fertilizer and pesticide, because we know 2021-2022 Maha season was a very good season in terms of climate, the rainfall, everything worked well for Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, we could not get something out of the land because of the lack of inputs. That's where the problem is. So there's Taraka Jasing, one of our coordinators, is asking a question. I'm sure directed to you, Professor Chandra. Serial nitrogen fixing technology. Can you elaborate it further?
Thank you. Yeah, but let me say first, Professor Ram Kumar is a very noted agricultural economist from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and you should host him in your program once. He's also a good writer. He writes in the newspapers in India on some of the contemporary issues in agriculture, and very knowledgeable. And I'm also would be curious as to how much of your productivity suffered because of this banning of fertilizer imports and pesticides in 2021. But coming to Taraka Jaisinghe's question on serial nitrogen fixing technology, this is one of our biggest aspirations in plant genetic engineering, is to see how we can help bring about cereals. The cereals we are talking about are rice, maize, and wheat, and along with millets are the most important food crops that provide us with the highest levels of calorific intake to the human population and also to the livestock. And much of our nitrogen fertilizer goes towards these cereal crops. Because unlike legumes, the legumes are your chickpea, pigeon pea, and soybean. Those are legumes, and they have the natural ability to fix nitrogen from the air. Air is 70% nitrogen, as you all know, and they're able to take that and fix it because they have a symbiotic symbiotic bacteria such as rhizobium that help fix that. The cereals don't have that. So one of the goals of scientific community is to see how we can take those genes from crops like groundnut or chickpea, pigeon pea, and the nitrogen fixing genes and put them into the cereals. There's a lot of research going on. Gates Foundation, for instance, has funded hundreds of millions of dollars in that research. The reason, what we are trying to understand now is there are literally hundreds of genes that are involved in fixing nitrogen in legumes. And so the current technology do not allow for transfer of such wholesale genes from legumes into the cereals. But nevertheless, there have been some good improvements that are going along. They even discovered a type of maize that can fix nitrogen in Mexico, which is, as you know, is the homeland of maize. I am quite confident in the next 15 to 20 years. It's not going to be in short term, but more like a medium to long term. We will probably have cereals fixing nitrogen because it is more of a technological issue, and the science, as you know, is moving so fast, and one day that would be possible. But until then, we are going to have many plants that are improved in nitrogen uptake, so you don't have to apply as much nitrogen, you don't have to apply as much phosphorus or potassium. There was one other question that came along related to talking about fertilizers, so I'll just take that up. This comes from Hassan Jamil, involved in fertilizer production, as to fertilizer scientific invention of human to feed. So this is very important because a lot of people do not understand that if you go to Google and type, what is the greatest invention of the 20th century that has saved more lives than any other innovation, you know what comes up on the top? It's fertilizer. Most people do not recognize that 8 billion people today would not be alive if not for the fertilizer. The Haber-Bosch process of making ammonia was invented in the early part of 20th century, helped produce food dramatically more than any other. The rice yields, today Sri Lanka produces about 5 tons of rice per hectare. And without the fertilizer, your rice yields would be 1 or 2 tons. And it has been estimated that 50% of the bones and muscles in your body can be directly attributed to the fertilizer that was fed to the crops that made up your food. And so without fertilizers, the humanity in this state would not have existed as it is. And so fertilizers are not the enemy they are. It is the misuse of fertilizer that has contributed to some of the bad, the information that you're seeing.
Thank you very much. And there are 2 questions from Professor Ramakumar. I think it's addressed
Go ahead.
Yeah, especially regarding paddy yield reduction. I think I gave part of the answer earlier for the question, but I will let you know in this way how it has impacted countries' food security, or at least food availability, especially with respect to the major staple. 3 months after the cultivating season started, in December last year, the government of Sri Lanka decided to liberalize the import of rice. And if you see, even before the Indian credit line came up, we have seen rice produced in India in our markets. Is basically to stabilize the market, because the government knew very well, they have got the information from scientists and everyone from the farming community that there's going to be a problem. And in early January, if I remember the date, even on 3rd January, the government declared saying that there they are ready to compensate the paddy farmers. And they also went ahead requesting government of China to send out 1 million tons of rice as a donation. But of course, we got only 5,000 tons of that. So this 1 million tons, it's a massive amount, as you know, because our annual country requirement of rice is about 2.4 million tons. So out of that, they're asking for 1 million. And thereafter, the cabinet of ministers also approved importation of rice from Myanmar, about 300,000 metric tons of rice to the cost of 134 million US dollars. Of course, this contract did not go ahead later. First consignment reached Sri Lanka, but there were other issues. But we now know through the Indian credit line also, we are getting rice imported, and our rice requirement in the country is in trouble, of course, but the food, in order to meet the needs of food security, government is importing rice. But how far, how long we can do that is a big question mark. In our case, we have to ensure that the contribution of agriculture to food security has to be maximized, and that's our effort. Any gaps, of course, has to be imported, we do understand, but then this contribution part has to take place effectively, and that's what Professor Chan also explained, that we have to bring in technology in the judicious way, and to make sure they are practically implementable. You cannot just bring in a technology from outside and just land it and implement it in Sri Lanka sometimes in the same way that it has been implemented in another country. You have to look at all those aspects and make sure careful scientific thinking come into picture, rather than trying to realize whims and fancies of people that just pop up in their minds at the cost of national budget. That's where the problem, Professor Chan, in Sri Lanka that we have faced in the recent past. So that's one answer that I can give to Professor Ramakumar. And there's another question, I think, addressing to me. It says, Dr. Marambi, yet another point I saw in your articles is that tea production did not fall on an annual basis. Thought it did fall short of production projection expectation. Can you please clarify what happened in tea? Okay, in 2021, when this irrational decision was taken in May, implemented in May actually officially, by that time, as I told you, tea being a perennial crop, the required fertilizers to part of the year, for half of the year, have already been imported. And if you look at the tea statistics, it's very, very clear. The production during the first 6 months, the made tea production, not the green leaf, the made tea production was much, much higher than the first 6 months of the year 2020. Year 2020 was a disaster. We know that because of the COVID scenario and so on. In the total year 2020, we produced only 278 million kilograms of tea. But in 2021, we were able to increase the total production up to 299 million kilograms of tea. But then it is mainly coming from the first 6 to 7 months of production. And if you look at it very carefully, if you look at the last 2 months of 2021, November and December, the production of November, December only has gone down by more than 12 million kilograms of made tea compared to the last 2 months production in year 2020. If we fix a value of at least $2 for those tea that we have exported, we are exporting 95% of our production, then at least we would have earned about $25 million. We have lost the total production. More importantly, Professor Ramkumar, during the first quarter of this year, compared to the first quarter of 2021, our foreign exchange earnings from tea was 52 million US dollars lower than that of what we earned last year. So that is the price that we have paid with all these unnecessary, irrational decisions that have been taken by the government. So enough blaming, but of course we have to continue reminding people, saying that this error that we have made should never be repeated. As Professor Chandra said, we have set an example to the whole world, but at a massive cost to a already ailing economy of Sri Lanka. That is where the problem is. And there's another comment from Aggregate. Actually, Mr. Atal Dichavardhana has made that comment, saying that Sri Lanka is still using very low quantities of pesticide in terms of cropland compared to many other countries. So the biggest problem is how people come out with these type of ideas, bring in data, trying to show it out. And I think academic scientists like us should come forward every time. This is the biggest mistake, Professor Chandra, we did. When we saw some erroneous information being presented, we just stopped laughing at it and kept quiet. That's all. But we have to come forward strongly, like we did in the recent past. Many academia, many scientists came forward, came public and tried to explain the government, not only showing them the mistake that they have committed, but also coming up with possible solutions to move forward. I think that is the way forward for Sri Lankas right now, as you quite correctly suggested. So thank you very much, Mr. Atod Javadana, for your
He
comments.
also makes a good point, Professor
Yeah.
Marambe. Athoda Jayawardene also makes a very good point about subsidies. And so I don't think, and so I am not saying that Sri Lankan farmers should not be subsidized. The point that I made was that fertilizer subsidies, and as you said later in 2005 it was changed. Anywhere when you have subsidy without proper oversight, tends to be misused. But at the same time, I do recognize that American farmers and European farmers especially are subsidized so much, and that puts Sri Lankan farmers at a disadvantage in the global market. So I believe Sri Lankan agriculture should be supported. I strongly believe Sri Lankan farmers should be supported and subsidized. But the way it was subsidized in fertilizer should not be the pattern. Those subsidies should be tied to productivity. The subsidies should be tied to fostering scientific innovation. And those are the kinds of subsidies that I would like to see. Yeah. We already 1 minute past the time, so
so let me quickly answer. Dr. Shanti Wilson is posing a question. Dr. Shanti Wilson, I was asking for your telephone number. Please do type it because my phone went bonkers, so I just want to have your phone number in. And what Dr. Shanti Wilson asks is, what percentage reduction in foreign exchange expenditure can we expect if we move into national adoption of GAP in Sri Lanka? A lot of calculations, estimations are done right now, Dr. Wilson. This is a very important point. GAP certification is currently mainly for Sri Lanka. And of course, we are looking at GAP export market as well. And the Sri Lanka Agriculture Economists Association is doing a lot of calculation in this aspect. So we'll see those results coming up soon. Quickly, Ben Hunt, again asking a question, good question. Does Sri Lankan crop production mostly go into human consumption market? The answer is yes. In the UK, fertilizer food production, because tea is a beverage, 95% of the beverage is exported because we do grow a lot of tea, Professor Chandra, but we do not have tea culture as such. That's why we export more than 95%. But in terms of food, yes, mostly for us. In UK, fertilizer supporters learn heavily on the food security debate. However, they don't acknowledge that much grain is currently fed to livestock, biofuel plants, or land is used to produce energy crops. For example, the UK largest wheat buyer is a bioethanol plant, buying around 1 metric ton of wheat out of the national crop production of around 40 metric tons. That's quite a lot. I do understand it's quite a lot, but the scenario is extremely different when you look at the Sri Lankan conditions, because our cherished goal from since gaining independence was reaching self-sufficient priority crops. Of course, we have succeeded in rice. We have come near with respect to maize, and of course, chili and all other condiments. We are doing quite well right now, but of course, the additions that took place, the taken recent past, imposed on the farming community have put us on the reverse gear, unfortunately, right now. But we have to revive, we have to recover. Let's do our best. And there's Aggregate Global, Professor Prakash. Is there a pattern to the Sri Lanka agriculture crisis? Policies are made on non-scientific beliefs. How can we fight this? Over to you.
Well, I just wrote that. Follow me on Twitter, because we talk about this every day, because this is not just a lot of scientists, whether we are in the business of vaccines or in agriculture or climate change. There's a lot of non-scientific beliefs coming into the page. What I believe is that we must move forward based on evidence, based on data. And so we must address many of these that are policies that are made. We must counter that. That is where people like Professor Marambe, who are very active, or Ram Kumar, who is a scholar, there is a great role of experts like yourself in trying to help bring about a meaningful conversation on contemporary issues, including agriculture, and how you can help educate the public, educate the media, but definitely the policymakers, so that they don't make the kind of mistakes that your President Gotabaya made in banning fertilizers and pesticides. Because history shows again and again, when policymakers, when politicians make such decisions based on non-scientific input coming from charlatans who have absolutely no interest in science or promoting scientific way moving forward, then the countries pay a very heavy price. And the Sri Lankan crisis in the last year is a great example of that. And so that's an excellent question from Aggregate. The way to move forward is through rational discussion and through individuals and experts like you are saying here in this forum, to keep talking in a way that our voices be heard. I do thank you, all of you, for giving me the opportunity, and it was a real honor to be in the same forum with you, Professor Marambe. Thank you very much.
Pleasure is mine.
Thank you, Taraka, for hosting me.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Channa. I know you have another meeting to join, and I'm totally with Professor Channa in his recommendation that he gave, the final comments that he made. Evidence-based policy making is the key. Of course, the stakeholder engagement and consultation has to take place in the best possible extent before such a drastic decision, even to think of such a drastic decision, because while knowing there are enough scientific facts against the decision that has been taken, very unfortunately, people ignored all those things and try to go ahead. So what we should do in the future, Professor Channa, to get people, members like you, and intellectuals like you also involved in this discussion, because countries cannot move alone. We do understand that. This international experience, together the local expertise, should join hand in hand, bring the evidences from outside, learn lessons, and then make sure agriculture in Sri Lanka would revive.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you,
Aggregate Global.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much for the participants today. So I would like to take my times to thank you, Professor Marambe and Aggregate Global and Saura, on behalf of the organizing committee. Actually, we hope in future to bring a lot of foreign experience and knowledge to the Sri Lanka to face this crisis. Once again, thank you very much, Professor Marambe. So you asked only one call. Thank you very much once again. And
thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you.